Across the cold waters of the North Sea, there was once a name that made kings strengthen their walls, monks fall to their knees in prayer, and entire villages abandon their homes before a single sword had been drawn. That name was Ragnar Lothbrok. To some he was a fearless explorer, to others a ruthless conqueror, while many believed he was nothing more than a legend created by the Viking imagination. More than 1,000 years later, historians still argue over whether Ragnar was one man or a combination of several famous Viking leaders whose stories merged into one unforgettable hero. Yet whether every tale is true or not, Ragnar Lothbrok became the symbol of the Viking Age itself. His story begins not with glory, but in a world where survival was never guaranteed. Scandinavia during the early 9th century was a harsh land of towering mountains, frozen rivers, dark forests, and endless coastlines. Small kingdoms constantly fought each other for land, wealth, and power. Every boy grew up knowing that peace rarely lasted long. From the moment they were old enough to walk, they watched their fathers sharpen axes, repair shields, and prepare ships for the next raid. Strength was respected above everything else, but intelligence often meant the difference between life and death. According to the Icelandic sagas, Ragnar was born into a noble family and was believed to be the son of the legendary King Sigurd Ring. Although modern historians cannot prove every detail, the stories describe Ragnar as a child who refused to accept ordinary limits. While other boys dreamed of becoming skilled warriors, Ragnar dreamed of discovering lands that no Viking from his village had ever seen. He spent countless evenings listening to sailors returning from distant voyages, fascinated by every story they told about unknown shores beyond the horizon. Those tales planted a dream that would eventually change European history. As Ragnar grew older, he trained relentlessly. He learned to fight with sword, spear, and axe, but he also understood that battles were rarely won by strength alone. He watched experienced leaders, learning how they inspired loyalty and commanded respect. He realized that the greatest weapon any leader could possess was not fear, but the willingness of others to follow him into the unknown. This idea would later separate him from nearly every rival he faced. Around this time, another remarkable figure entered his life. Her name was Lagertha. Unlike most women of her time, the sagas describe Lagertha as a shield maiden, a warrior who stood beside men in battle instead of waiting for them at home. Her courage became legendary throughout Scandinavia. One famous story claims Ragnar first met her after she helped defend her homeland during a brutal invasion. Impressed by her bravery, he sought her hand in marriage, but according to legend, she tested him before accepting. Outside her home, she had placed a fierce bear and a powerful hound to guard the entrance. Rather than turning back, Ragnar confronted both beasts, killing the bear with a spear and the hound with his bare hands before finally meeting Lagertha. Historians cannot verify whether this dramatic tale truly happened, yet it perfectly reflects how Norse storytellers wanted Ragnar to be remembered, a man who never stepped away from impossible challenges. Their marriage became one of the most famous relationships in Viking legend. Together, they built a family and, according to tradition, had children including Bjorn, who would later become known as Bjorn Ironside. While Ragnar often sought adventure beyond the sea, Lagertha earned respect as both a leader and a warrior capable of defending her people. Their partnership represented something rare for its time. Two individuals admired not only for their strength, but also for their determination to shape their own destiny. Yet despite building a family and gaining respect among his people, Ragnar felt restless. Raiding neighboring villages no longer satisfied him. He believed unimaginable wealth lay far beyond the North Sea in the kingdoms of England, but most experienced jarls dismissed the idea. They argued that the ocean was too dangerous, the journey too long, and the risks too great. Ships could disappear without a trace, storms could swallow entire fleets, and no treasure was worth such danger. Ragnar listened to every warning, yet his conviction only grew stronger. If everyone else feared sailing west, then those distant lands would remain rich and poorly defended. That simple realization changed everything. Rather than accepting tradition, Ragnar secretly began preparing for a voyage that many believed was impossible. He studied tides, weather, and navigation while gathering loyal companions who trusted his vision more than the fears of older leaders. He knew that if he failed, his name would be forgotten forever. But if he succeeded, the world beyond Scandinavia would never be the same again. As the first longships were pulled toward the cold waters and the morning mist rolled across the fjords, Ragnar looked west toward an empty horizon. He had no way of knowing that the journey about to begin would transform him from an unknown Viking into one of the greatest legends Europe would ever remember. When Ragnar's ships finally disappeared beyond the horizon, many believed they would never return. The North Sea was one of the most dangerous stretches of water known to the Vikings. Powerful storms could appear without warning, waves could tear ships apart, and even the most experienced sailors often vanished without a trace. Yet Ragnar remained calm. He trusted the skill of his crew, the strength of their longships, and above all, his belief that fortune favored those brave enough to seek it. After several days at sea, the gray outline of England finally appeared in the distance. Before them lay a land unlike anything most of Ragnar's warriors had ever seen. Rich green fields stretched across the countryside, peaceful villages rested along rivers, and monasteries stood filled with gold, silver, rare books, and religious treasures collected over generations. More importantly, these settlements had never faced warriors who could appear from the sea without warning. Ragnar understood that surprise would become his greatest weapon. Instead of attacking heavily defended towns, he chose smaller targets where resistance was weak and escape was always possible. His warriors landed quickly, struck with overwhelming speed, gathered supplies and treasure, and returned to their ships before local armies could organize a defense. Each successful raid increased not only their wealth, but also Ragnar's reputation. Stories about the fearless Viking leader who crossed the impossible sea spread throughout both England and Scandinavia. Every victory attracted more followers. Young warriors dreamed of earning glory beside him, while experienced fighters admired his ability to return home with fewer losses than other leaders. Ragnar was not reckless. He knew when to fight and when to retreat. He understood that surviving to raid another day was often a greater victory than winning a single battle at any cost. As the years passed, his influence continued to grow. Eventually, he earned the title of Jarl, giving him greater authority and the ability to command even larger expeditions. But power also brought difficult choices. According to the legendary sagas, Ragnar's marriage to Lagertha slowly began to fall apart. The exact reasons remain uncertain. Some stories suggest political ambition, while others describe it as the will of the gods. Whatever the truth may have been, Ragnar eventually left Lagertha and married a woman named Aslaug. Her story was surrounded by mystery from the very beginning. Legend claimed she was the daughter of the legendary dragon slayer Sigurd and the warrior Brynhild, making her part of one of the greatest heroic bloodlines in Norse mythology. Ragnar is said to have been impressed not only by her beauty, but also by her remarkable wisdom. Unlike many queens of her time, Aslaug was respected for her intelligence and her ability to advise Ragnar during moments of uncertainty. Together, they would have several sons whose names would later become almost as famous as their fathers. Bjorn Ironside grew into a fearless explorer and commander. Ivar the Boneless became known for his brilliant mind and unpredictable tactics. Ubba earned respect as a fierce warrior, while Hvitserk and Sigurd Snake in the Eye also became celebrated figures in Viking tradition. Ragnar understood that his sons would one day inherit more than land or treasure. They would inherit his reputation. He trained them not only to fight, but to think like leaders capable of making difficult decisions. While his family grew, Ragnar continued searching for even greater opportunities beyond England. One of the most famous stories connected with his life tells of the daring expedition against Paris in the year 845. Although historians still debate Ragnar's exact role, Norse tradition credits him with leading hundreds of Viking ships up the river Seine toward one of the richest cities in Europe. The Frankish defenders believed their walls would stop any invader, yet the Vikings demonstrated once again that speed, determination, and psychological warfare could overcome enemies who seemed far stronger on paper. According to medieval chronicles, the Frankish king Charles the Bald eventually paid an enormous ransom to persuade the Vikings to leave the city. Whether every detail happened exactly as described remains uncertain, but the event transformed the Viking image across Europe forever. From that moment onward, rulers no longer viewed northern raiders as isolated pirates. They recognized them as a military force capable of threatening entire kingdoms. By now, Ragnar Lothbrok had become more than a successful warrior. His name itself inspired fear. Parents warned their children about Viking ships, monks prayed for protection whenever sails appeared on the horizon, and kings strengthened fortresses in anticipation of future attacks. Ragnar had achieved what few leaders ever accomplish. He had become a legend during his own lifetime. Yet history often reserves its greatest trials for those who appear unstoppable, and the man who had spent decades chasing glory was about to face the one battle he could never truly control: his final journey. For decades, Ragnar Lothbrok had lived the life every Viking dreamed of. He had crossed seas that others feared, defeated enemies who believed themselves untouchable, and earned a reputation that echoed from the frozen fjords of Scandinavia to the royal courts of England and Francia. But no warrior, no matter how legendary, could escape the passage of time. As Ragnar grew older, younger leaders began making names for themselves, and some questioned whether the great conqueror still possessed the strength that had once made him unstoppable. Pride, ambition, and the desire to prove that his greatest days were not behind him pushed Ragnar toward one final expedition. According to the Norse sagas, he chose to sail to England once again, this time with a much smaller force than the armies he had commanded during the height of his power. Some believed he underestimated his enemies, while others claimed he deliberately sought a glorious end worthy of a Viking king. Whatever his true intentions were, fate had already begun to turn against him. Violent storms scattered parts of his fleet before they even reached the English coast, leaving Ragnar with far fewer warriors than he had expected. Instead of retreating, he pressed forward. It was a decision that reflected everything about his character. Ragnar had spent his entire life refusing to turn back, even when the odds were impossible. On English soil, his exhausted warriors soon encountered the forces of King Ella of Northumbria. Outnumbered and unable to regroup with the rest of his fleet, Ragnar fought with the courage that had made him famous, but bravery alone could not change the outcome. His warriors were overwhelmed, and for the first time in countless years, Ragnar Lothbrok was captured alive. What happened next became one of the most famous stories of the Viking Age. According to the sagas, King Ella ordered Ragnar to be thrown into a pit filled with venomous snakes as punishment for years of Viking raids. Whether this event truly happened remains uncertain, and many historians believe it may have been a symbolic tale created by later storytellers. Yet the legend endured because it perfectly reflected the image of Ragnar that the Vikings admired most. Even as the snakes surrounded him, the old warrior refused to beg for mercy. Instead, he is said to have smiled, accepting death with the calm determination expected of a man who believed that those who died fearlessly would be welcomed into Valhalla. Tradition attributes to Ragnar a final warning for King Ella, that his sons would one day hear of his fate, and when they did, England itself would tremble. Whether those were his exact words, no one can know. But what happened afterward gave the legend extraordinary power. News of Ragnar's death spread across Scandinavia, reaching his sons. Whatever rivalries or disagreements had existed between them were forgotten. Bjorn Ironside, Ivar the Boneless, Ubba, Hvitserk, and Sigurd Snake in the Eye united with one purpose: revenge. In 865, a massive Viking force, known today as the Great Heathen Army, crossed the North Sea and invaded the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Unlike earlier raids, this was not a quick expedition for treasure. It was a determined campaign that changed the course of English history. Kingdom after kingdom fell before the advancing Vikings. Northumbria was conquered, and King Ella himself was captured. Later sagas claim that he was executed by the infamous Blood Eagle, although modern historians continue to debate whether this ritual ever existed or whether it became part of Viking mythology centuries later. Regardless of the details, there is little doubt that Ragnar's death became the spark that united some of the greatest Viking leaders of their generation. More than 11 centuries have passed since the age of Ragnar, Lothbrok, yet his story refuses to disappear. Historians continue to separate fact from legend. Archaeologists search for new evidence, and writers still return to his name when telling stories about the Viking Age. Perhaps the greatest reason for his lasting fame is not whether every battle truly happened or whether every legend is accurate. It is that Ragnar came to represent something timeless: the courage to challenge the impossible, the determination to seek new horizons when others chose safety, and the belief that a single person could change history. Through vision, leadership, and fearless ambition. Whether he was one extraordinary man or the legendary reflection of several great Viking leaders, Ragnar Lothbrok remains one of the most enduring figures ever associated with the Viking world. His ships have long since vanished from the sea, but his name still sails through history, reminding us why legends are never measured only by facts, but by the generations they continue to inspire.